Welcome back, everyone, to more from the Sable Eyes. I'm Mitch, and I'm here today with Jordan. How are we doing, Jordan?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Mitch.
Can you hear that? Can you hear the cat banging up against the door with a? She's got
Certainly can.
She's got a ping pong ball now. She's being entertained by that, and we're being entertained by the king of item lock in this particular format, and that's Beheeyem. Now we've got a bit of a list for Cosmic Eclipse. And this deck gets a little bit better because of a card that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. That's Lily's Clefairy Doll, or Polka Doll, or whatever it's called.
Yeah, Lily's Clefairy Doll is a really strong card, I think. It's obviously reminiscent of good old Robo Substitute, which saw a lot of play back in the day. And it's strictly like a better version of that because it can actually put it onto the bottom of your deck from play if you choose to do so. So it's definitely a great tool that this Beheeyem deck gets, obviously having the option to switch around and make plays with that Pokédoll. But let's get right into the Pokemon line. I'm sure no one will be surprised to see that we're playing a 4-4 line of your item locking boy Beheeyem, who does not have much competition in terms of other item lock decks to compete against. But right now he's the best item locking deck in the format, and it's actually pretty strong attack. 90 damage for triple colorless energy, which is an energy card that we run in this list. And you item lock your opponent and shuffle itself into the deck, which you'd think is technically like a negative effect, but that allows us to switch into our Clefairy Doll every single turn, and is all of a sudden going to turn this into almost a Shedinja deck as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to be theoretically able to, once we've set up, we're going to be able to deal 90 damage a turn with Mysterious Noise, lock our opponent out of items, and then not give up a prize. So as long as everything's working well for us, we should make it really tough for our opponent to take prizes. And one of the best things about this deck, firstly, we don't play any GXs, so Great Catcher is useless. But even if decks are playing Custom Catcher, they aren't going to be able to use them to gust around that Clefairy Doll because they've been item locked. So it seems like a pretty strong situation to be in, but obviously it's a bit of a combo to get those cards together.
It certainly is. The fact that you're shuffling 3 cards into your deck every time, quite a lot of draw power. So to try and deal with that negative effect, we are playing a 3-3 line of Pidgeotto with Airmail to draw one of the top 2 cards of our deck every turn for each Pidgeotto we have in play. So ideally we're going to be wanting to get probably 2 Pidgeotto into play to start cycling through our deck, as much as it would be nice to get 3 into play. Bench space is a bit of a cramped space in this list, so usually we're only going to have access to 2, but 2 still pretty good for cycling through your deck quickly.
Certainly is. Airmail is one of those abilities that when it came out, everyone went, yeah, no, this is going to be a good card, and then it just dropped off the face of the earth. But it has really seen a lot of use in the last few months. And yeah, we're seeing Pidgeottos all over the place now. Really, really good in this deck, not only because it is able to provide a little bit of consistency, but it also pairs quite nicely with the card that I presume, Jordan, you're about to show off.
Yep, there's a very new spicy card in this list, which I don't think has really seen much play before, especially in Beheeyem decks, and that is the Florges from, I believe it's Forbidden Light, so it's a card that hasn't really seen too much play. We're playing a 2/2 line of Florges with its ability Wondrous Gift, which allows you to, once during your turn, flip a coin, and if heads, you put an item card from your discard pile on top of your deck, so you can use this to get your Clefairy Pokédolls onto the top of your deck and then draw into them straight away with Airmail. And this effectively means that every time you flip heads, you're effectively denying your opponent a prize card. So even though it's a stage 2 Pokemon, that's a pretty powerful effect to have when you're item locking your opponent.
Yeah, it's part of the reason why our Pidgeotto line is a little bit smaller than we might have expected to see from Beheeyem. And like you said, we get quite cramped on our bench space because this Florges, if it works, becomes a really, really strong utility card. Not only can it help you find that Clefairy Doll, but maybe if you've already got one, you can potentially set yourself up with a myriad of different cards that you might need throughout the game. It's a really, really strong card, as long as you can flip heads. Flipping tails doesn't necessarily matter, because you should be able to set up reasonably well anyway, but it just gives you that extra little bit of added consistency to help you get over the top of some of the decks that might put in a little bit more pressure on Beheeyem.
Yeah, exactly. When you get to flip a coin every single turn, eventually you're going to get heads every card to be good, even if you just get it occasionally. Grabbing a consistency item to the top of your deck, or just, of course, getting one of those Pokédolls back every turn is a really good effect. So playing a pretty well, not super thick, but a reasonably thick line of Florges. But we've got a couple other tech Pokemon on the list now. We're playing one copy of the new Mimikyu from Cosmic Eclipse with the busted ability to block your opponent's Pokemon GX's abilities that have damage counters on them. So this is in here specifically for a couple matchups. One of the main ones being Mew and Mewtwo Tag Team GX is a pretty annoying card for this deck to deal with. They do have things like that Jirachi GX to block their weakness, which we can shut off with Mimikyu, and of course Mewtwo itself has a pretty busted ability that we can shut off at times. And the other really important matchup that we can block with the Mimikyu is actually the new Volcarona GX, which has effectively the Decidueye GX's Feather Arrow ability on a stage 1, so they can start picking off our Pidgeotos on the bench and start getting around our Clefairy Dolls really easily. So we really want to make sure our opponent isn't taking advantage of all those extra chip damage with Volcarona.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want our opponent to be able to move around the Clefairy Doll that we have in the active. If they can gust around it or they can move around it by using some of their abilities, then we have to stop that where we can, because if they just start knocking out our Pokemon, we just lose. There's nothing that we can do. But if they can't get those knockouts, they're forced to go through the Clefairy Doll, then their win condition is us missing Clefairy Doll. So this Mimikyu turns those matchups from kind of bad, very awkward matchups to very winnable ones simply by shutting off those abilities. And you'll see it a lot in our non-GX decks. I think every single non-GX deck that we've featured on the channel so far, bar maybe one, has featured this Mimikyu because it is so powerful in combination with Shrine of Punishment, which we'll talk about a little bit later on.
It's certainly a pretty good card. And another non-GX tech that we're playing in this list is one copy of Mew. Bench Barrier is pretty important ability when you're playing a deck like this, where you're trying to lock your opponent out, keep a Pokédoll in the active every turn. You're really just trying to deny your opponent prize cards as much as possible. And there is quite a few snipe cards in the format right now. Maybe not as much as they have been in previous years, but we do still occasionally see those tag bolts coming out from Pikarom. More importantly, there's the new Reshiram and Zekrom tag team, which can actually snipe 2 Pokemon with its GX attack if they've got the proper setup, which is really scary. And of course, there's also stuff like good old Meganimal GX with Venom Shot floating around in Mewtwo lists and in Blacephalon lists, which are going to cause us trouble. So the Mew does give us a pretty decent matchup against all of those decks. It obviously sucks having to dedicate a bench space if you don't need to, but you're really going to be happy you've got that Mew if you hit one of those matchups.
Yeah, exactly, and it's quite good because in reality you're never going to have these two cards compete for a space. Mimikyu and Mew both do a similar job, but they do them in different matchups. So you're never going to have that Mimikyu down when you're playing Reshiram, for example, because Mimikyu doesn't need to be in play. You don't need to turn off abilities. You can just put the Mew down, stop the snipe damage. And similarly, if you go up against Mew, you want to turn off their abilities so that they can't use their attacks. Then you go into Mimikyu instead of the Mew. So you can kind of get away with just playing one or the other, depending on the matchup. I don't think you're ever realistically going to get both. So in every matchup, you'll need to make a choice.
Yeah, and I'd say between the two of them, you cover most matchups. And there's one more Pokemon on this, so we'll chuck it just here as a sneaky Ditto Prism, which is going to act as both the 5th Elgyem and also the 4th Pidgey. Doesn't work with our Florges line because we're not playing any copies of Floette right now, but you could tech in Floette as well if you wanted to take more advantage of this Ditto Prism, but we see Ditto as a card that's being played in pretty much every deck that runs multiple stage 1s and isn't running like a red and blue engine, so no surprise to see it here. Nothing too special to talk about, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. Ditto's just a safety card. It means we can give ourselves that extra Pidgey to find a Pidgeotto if one's prized, or set up an extra Elgyem for our Beheeyem next turn. It just gives you that extra flexibility because the bench is very full in the early game. You want to make sure that you can do one or the other.
It definitely is. But that's going to be it for the Pokemon line. We'll move on to... Speaking of filling up our bench, we are playing 4 copies of Professor Elm's Lecture to try and do that very thing as quickly as possible. It's going to give us access to not only our Ditto Prism, of course, but our Pidgeys, our Elgyems, our Mew if we want it, and even our Pidgeotto is going to be accessible via Elm. So Elm is actually not only a really good supporter turn 1, but it's also pretty good in like the 2nd or 3rd turn, just to make sure you're able to find those Pidgeottos and start drawing cards as quickly as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Most decks that play Professor Realm find it is a dead card in the mid to late game. For us, it could potentially come up if we're able to play Professor Elm in the early game, set up our board, and then we can find a 2 or 3 Pidgeotos, maybe an Elgyem as well to get onto the bench in the second or third turn. We wouldn't be unhappy with that. Means that we've just got that extra utility. We don't need to worry about 3 dead cards after we've played it on turn 1.
And yeah, setting up Pokemon is obviously very important for the deck. You got to think that your setup going to be in a pretty good position. So besides Elm for setup, we're also playing 3 copies of Cynthia as our strongest straight draw supporter. We're not playing Lily in a deck like this where we want to use Elms turn 1. So we've gone for Cynthia as a way to try and refresh our hand once we start to run out of resources. You can obviously play Cynthia and then use a couple airmails or potentially a Florges ability to set your hand up even better than just the 6 cards. But the shuffle draw is just really going to be important for a deck like this where you need to keep drawing cards over and over.
Yeah, and Cynthia is always just the safe option. If you ever want to draw cards and you don't want to put in Lily, then Cynthia's the way to go. Can save your butt in the late game as well. If things go very poorly, this deck might potentially take a long time to finish off a game. Maybe you need to play Cynthia to stop yourself decking out or something like that. Yeah, 3 copies, probably pretty safe. Could fit in a 4th, but hey, we need to find space for some other cool cards.
Yeah, and the next one is actually the only new supporter we're playing. And it's actually a really cool supporter. And you can see that I actually pulled one at the pre-release today. So
yeah.
One non-proxy Rosa.
3 copies of Rosa. Beautiful.
Pretty exciting. So yeah, Rosa, it's obviously not going to be used for effective search for basic energy, but what's really cool about Rosa is it actually works if your opponent knocks out a Pokédoll. So your opponent can take a knockout, take 0 prizes, and then you get to activate Rosa, search your deck for a Pokemon, search your deck for a trainer card. And this is actually going to be our main way for setting up our Stage 2 Florges. It'll allow us to search for the Florges and a rare candy and just get a Stage 2 into play out of nowhere without too much digging required. Obviously, it's going to help us chain our Beheeyem over and over again, getting like a Beheeyem and a Mysterious Treasure or something to keep getting those lines out. Assuming we can find our triple acceleration energy in a different route, we can effectively just keep playing Rosa over and over again if we want to, and make sure our hand is always going to be filling up with good cards.
Yeah, and it means that it's so much easier to find those combo pieces. Like Elgyem and Beheeyem, you used to have to go looking for them when you were playing Beheeyem. You had to dig pretty hard, or you need to get a little bit lucky. But Rosa now means that the only card that we're realistically looking for in the deck on any given turn is our triple acceleration energy. It's the hardest card to find, and Rosa doesn't look for it, but it means that we can get the others a little bit easier. And yeah, it's a really nice looking card. I like the English version. It looks sweet.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was a whole host. That was a...
Yeah, it's going to be hard to find a bunch of those.
All right, on to the next card. And this is a really interesting one. It was actually the idea to play this card, Mitch, and that is the Blues Tactics. Originally, I was playing the new supporter card, Guzma and Hala, to search our deck for a Stadium card, a Tool card, and a Special Energy, mainly for the Special Energy, of course. But we found ourselves kind of not really being able to take advantage of Guzma Hala because we had to discard cards from our hand. It was kind of hard to set up, and you came up with the idea of using the blue to find out triple acceleration energy instead, because you can use it on the same turn that you attack, shuffle your Beheeyem line into the deck, then draw up to 8 and potentially draw those cards right back into your hand.
Yeah, well, the thing with blue is that I'll tell a little story. It's story time. Okay, so Jordan and I were testing this deck out today. I was playing against him, and I kept having Guzma and Hala in my hand, but I never had any cards to discard. And like with Pidgeotto, I'm trying to find things off of Airmail. I want to use my Florges to get the card that I want, and I'm just never able to actually discard anything to find the triple accelerated. And so we were sitting here tonight being like, oh, what's the best option? What are we going to be able to do? And we just go, oh, Blues Tactics could be a way, because we're not really fussed about playing a supporter on any given turn. Like Rosa would be great, but sometimes we don't need to play any supporters. Blues Tactics could be really, really strong just to have a low hand size, draw up to 8, and then give ourselves the best odds to find not only a good supporter for next turn, but also to find that triple accelerated energy. So it's something that we haven't tested extensively yet, but I can see this working really well.
Yeah, I'm excited to give it a go. The Guzma, as you were saying, like it does get but it's only really good if you've already got the perfect stuff. If you've got the Beheeyem in your hand, you've got the Elgyem ready to go, you've got everything you need to set up perfectly except for the triple acceleration energy. It's a great card, but you don't always have all those cards, and Blue Tactics is going to help you get out of a tight spot. So we're giving it a go. If you want to play Guzma Hala instead, that's completely respectable. I think both are good cards, but we're giving this one a go instead.
Yeah, absolutely.
one more supporter card to talk about, and that is one copy of Brock's Grit, which, and once again, it's not a strictly necessary supporter card in my opinion. We only just added it in tonight as well because we were having a little issues. We were contemplating going up to a 4/4 line of Pidgeotto because we were having some of them getting knocked out by various things, whether having to sacrifice one, discard one, have it knocked out by spell tag or whatever. And the Brock script, just rather than upping the Pidgeotto line to 4/4, considering we don't really have much bench space for that, we thought going the Brock script's going to allow us to shuffle in our Pidgeotto lines. It's going to allow us to get back our Mimikyu or our Mew if it gets knocked out early, and just increasing the number of Beheems and Elgyms in deck is going to make it easier to chain them in the late game. So a nice safety net card to have here if you end up discarding too many Pokemon.
Yeah, exactly. And it also brings Professor Elm back into the game, right? Because there's a certain point where Elm is going to be a dead card. If we Brock's Grit, then Elm's back again, so we can potentially use that. And yeah, like I said about Blue's Tactics, this deck doesn't really need to play any specific supporter apart from Elm on the first turn. Once it's set up, it's pretty good. So it's just a matter of making sure that you can consistently get the cards that you need, and we think that these supporters are probably going to be the ones that are best to get you what you need. Now, just before you go into the trainers, Jordan, you've been cutting in and out like a tiny little bit. I'm sure that everything's fine, but I'm just saying that if everything goes to hell, it's your fault, 100%.
Good to know. I'll keep it in mind.
I just wanted the audience to know that they weren't the ones that were going crazy. Every now and then, Jordan does drop out.
That seems fair.
It's only for like a microsecond, but it's just enough to be annoying.
Alright, well,
nothing you can do about it. Nothing you can do about it.
No, well, just gotta hope it fixes itself. We'll move on to the trainers now, and we'll start off with the card we've been talking about for Clefairy's Pokédoll. Sorry, Lily's Clefairy doll, I think it's called. Something along
Lily's
those lines.
Clefairy doll. It's funny because you literally just dropped out for like a second, but that's fine.
Yep, beautiful.
Keep going, keep going.
I feel like we've already basically said everything we need to say about this card already. It's gonna be the main card we're going to stick in the active every time we attack with Beheeyem, and we're gonna be wanting to chain it over and over again, ideally with our Fortress ability, so definitely want to have 4 copies of this card.
Yeah, certainly do, and just being able to get it from the discard back onto the top of your deck is so strong, but like you said before when we were talking about the comparison with RoboSub, the fact that you can put it in the active if you're absolutely desperate and then put it back to the bottom of your deck, save it for later, is really good, because there are moments in a pinch where you do need a Pokemon in the active that isn't Beheeyem or Pidgeotto or something like that, and maybe Lily's Clefairy doll could potentially be that free retreat option that you're looking for, but hey, it's definitely a really good card, and it's the reason I think that this deck is that little bit better in Cosmic Eclipse.
Yeah, well, that's the main reason we're even...
yeah, the reason we're looking into it, yeah.
Alright, so next up we're playing also 4 copies of Pokegear, as we were already mentioning. There's a lot of cool stuff in this list, and there's a few that we are going to want to find early, such as that Professor Elm's lecture we really want to have on the first turn. And of course, we want to be able to find the backup supporters like those Roses or the Blues Tactics, or even the Brock Script if you're in a tight pinch. So having access to tutor some supporters from your discard pile into your hand is definitely a strong effect to have in this list.
Yeah, exactly. And Pokegear speaks for itself. If you need to find a specific supporter on turn 1, Pokegear is the best way to do it. Just gives you 8 outs to potentially hit that Professor Elm instead of just the 4.
Yep, and onto the Pokemon search. We've already spoken about the 3 Roses that we're playing, but on top of that, we're also playing 4 Pokemon Communication and 3 Mysterious Treasure to act as a total of, I think it's 10 Pokemon search cards in total if you include the Rosa, which is pretty important considering we're going to need a lot of Pokemon search. We've obviously got the Pidgeotos as well to draw extra cards, but there's a lot of Pokemon in this list, so Pokemon Communication is going to be putting a lot of work, and the Mysterious Treasure, it does get mostly just the Beheeyem line, but you can also use it to find your Mimikyu or your Mew if you need those cards as well.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Mysterious Treasure could potentially be a 4 count here, but like you said, Pokemon Communication just so much more valuable to find those extra little bits, like the Pidgeotto and the Florges are theoretically more important in the early game than the Beheeyem is, so giving yourself the best out to find those cards is good. I could definitely see the count going up to 4 Mysterious Treasure though, because you do need to find Beheeyems, but hey, 3 is probably enough. Especially with the Rosa and the Pokecoms, you shouldn't have any problems finding the Pokemon you need.
Well, that's the theory, and let's hope that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
So on to the next one. We've already mentioned it a few times. We're playing 2 rare candy. Don't really need to talk about it in too much detail. We're playing 2 Flabébés and 2 Florges, so why not chuck in 2 candy?
Yeah, exactly. And there's an argument to be made that realistically you only ever need to play rare candy once, because you're only realistically going to have 1 Florges in play. But as the world champion Henry Brand always says, if you're expecting to play 1 copy of a card, then you should probably play 2 just in case.
Seems like fine logic to me. And you could also use that same logic for the card, which is U-turn board. This is not as important in this deck as it used to be. We used to bring up a whole bunch of walling Pokemon such as Ninetales. We want to be able to retreat if our opponent failed to knock it out and bring our Beheeyem back into the active. But now that we're using Pokédoll, we're not going to need to retreat as often, but it's still going to be obviously something we need to do. We can search for it with Rosa. Once you get 1 U-turn board into play, unless it gets fathered or something, it should be active for the rest of the game, so you can use whichever Pokemon you attach to it as a pivot. Do need to note that it doesn't work with Florges. It only brings its retreat cost down to 1, so you gotta try and avoid your Florges being put into the active position. But for the most part, U-turn board's going to be everything you need to get into your Beheeyem every turn.
Yeah, exactly. If you've got your Clefairy Doll, or Lily's Clefairy Doll, and you've got a Pidgeotto with a U-turn board, then you're never realistically going to have a problem getting that maneuverability to get your Beheeyems into the active. The worst thing is when you start the Flabébé and have to attach the U-turn board to get it out of the active. You just know that U-turn board is gone forever.
Well, it'd suck if that happened today, wouldn't it, Mitch?
It would suck if it happened 2 games in a row, Jordan. Yes, it would.
The last item card we're playing in this list is 1 copy of Reset Stamp, which is very powerful in this deck. It's almost wrong to only play 1, but we're able to get it back over and over with Florges if we do choose to do so. So the 1-of makes sense. It's just so strong to be able to Reset Stamp your opponent to a low hand size while they're ability locked from Mimikyu and while they're item locked from Beheeyem. You can really just shut your opponent's deck down by playing a Reset Stamp at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that your opponent realistically is only going to be able to take 1 prize per turn, and they're not even going to be able to take a prize every turn. Reset Stamp has so much utility. You can stamp people early if they're building up a big hand size. Wait a couple of turns, you get it back off of a floor, just flip stamp them down to maybe 4 cards. They take 4 or 5 turns to get down to 2 or 3 prize cards left, and then you just stamp them again. And like you said, once they're locked with items and abilities and all that kind of stuff, there are lots of decks that are just going to fold to that. As long as you can keep your consistent Beheeyems going, then a low hand size will really cripple a lot of decks.
It certainly will. And finally, we've already spoken about 2 copies of Shrine of Punishment, because this deck does need to play a Stadium card. If you don't play Stadium card, you can very easily lose to like a single copy of a Wonder Lab. If you versus a Fairy deck like Guardian, if they play Wonder Lab down, you cannot declare an attack for the rest of the game unless you remove that Stadium. So we're playing a couple Shrine because not only does obvious synergy with Mimikyu, but it's probably just the most powerful Stadium we can play in this deck. You could also make an argument for like Power Plant if you didn't run a Wonder Mimikyu, or it could be Chaotic Swell if you're really worried about Wonder Lab. But for us, Shrine of Punishment feels like it does the most.
Yeah, and you can recur it as well, can't you, with your... or is it just items with Florges?
I believe the Florges is only items.
Oh, well, forget I said that. It's really good. It's a 2 count, and you're only ever going to have 2, but you need them, so make sure you keep them. I should read the card, shouldn't I?
Got to be a little careful with your Shrine of Punishments, but it's not strictly necessary. Like, once you've 1 damage counter on all of your opponent's Pokemon, the Mimikyu is going to be active for as long as it stays in play anyway, so not too big an issue there. And the energy line, really easy to talk about here because, well, there's 4 of them and they're right there. It's 4 triple accelerated energy.
Yeah, that's all we need. That is all we need. We're going to attack with Beheeyem and they're going to go back in the deck. We do not need any other energy in this list. There could potentially be like an argument for playing like 1 random, like maybe like a fire energy or something like that. So you could search it out with Rosa and do like a cheeky Heat Factory play or something. But hey, if you're doing silly things like that, then maybe building Beheeyem is not the place to be, because we don't have space for that kind of stuff. 4 energy is all we need, so that's all we're gonna play.
I mean, that would be nice because it would allow you to get that just out of the active with the U-turn board.
Oh yeah,
I think
I'm gonna try and fit that random 1 energy in, Jordan. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna try and fit it in.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that 4 triple acceleration all that this deck really needs, and you don't really have to worry about them being discarded at all because, well, it gets shuffled back into your deck every turn. So even cards like Father or Crushing Hammer are never going to discard your Accelerated Energy because they're always being shuffled into the deck every turn. The only way you would discard it is if you choose to do so yourself, or if you were playing Acrobikes. I was finding I had to discard triple Acceleration Energy quite a few times when I was playing Acrobikes in this list, so we ended up cutting Acrobikes to fit in a few of our new supporter cards such as Rosa. And your triple Acceleration Energy, ideally, we had to stay in deck for most of the game, so the further you go into the game, the more likely you'll be able to draw one every turn.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the key with this deck, is that it really does struggle in the early game, but once you've gotten set up, the later the game goes, the more likely you are to win, because every turn that goes by, you give yourself a more and more significant chance to find all the cards you need to keep your lock going.
Yep, and that is going to be it for the 60 cards that we are showing off today. This deck has quite a bit of potential just because, like, you set this combo up, not much can do with it, right? Like, you're going to beat almost every deck with their item locks. They can't take prizes. You've got Mew and Mimikyu to protect your bench. The only deck that I think this really is going to struggle with is, like, Malamar, because they've got that new Blacephalon, which is going to be able to really deal with your Pidgeotos really easily. But hey, you're playing a deck that's got, like, Reset Stamp and item lock, so if you're lucky, you can stop them from getting the Blacephalon into play, get a Clefairy Doll into the active every turn, and all of a sudden, even Malamar's going to struggle to beat this deck.
Yeah, I think the key is any deck that draws poorly, whilst this deck is drawing well, will probably lose. And like you mentioned, there are plenty of opportunities to win games with it. I'm just sick of saying that this deck loses to Malamar. I've been saying that a lot recently. But hey, that just is a testament to how good that deck is. But hey, anyway, thanks Jordan for sharing this list with us. It looks really fun and I'm keen to test it out.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to see how it goes, and yeah, we'll have to wait and see if it's able to perform as consistently as we hope it does.
Yeah, exactly. If you're keen to see more, maybe you want to watch someone fumble around with Beheeyem until eventually they lose, then feel free to click the Sableye in the middle of the screen to subscribe. On the left-hand side, we have some videos that YouTube thinks you'll like, and on the right, we have our Cosmic Eclipse playlist for more of our training center videos. If you are involved on Facebook or Twitter, then give us a like or a follow or whatever it is at the Sableyes _YT. And we'll see you all next time for more from the Sableyes. Bye.